Let's watch, before we dig into this, I think it would be helpful to watch a little bit of it. It's a terrible clip. Somebody took a video in a museum and put it on YouTube, but I think it's really important that we get at least a partial sense of what this work is like. And I'm going to skip a little bit, so you're not going to get the time dilation. Sorry, get a little taste of it. So a man is walking out towards you. He stops. Oh, sorry. Stands there, dark room, big screen. Yes. You want something to happen. Oh, water is dripping on his head. So you've seen this piece?
No.
Oh.
I've seen these three, but I haven't seen it. I thought you guys could see the door back there.
Yeah. So you can hear the water. And again, be aware this is a poor, somebody's probably cell phone recording. So the sound is really intense of the dripping water. And then the pouring bucket of water. So he vanishes. So that's one side. And on the other side, I don't have video footage, but it's essentially the same thing. Same body, same man walks forward, but instead of being doused in water, he bursts into flames.
And isn't it the same soundtrack?
And, well, you're in the same space.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
So
you're
it
hearing the
sounds
same
like water
things.
when you're looking at water is actually the same
Sounds
sound.
like fire when you're listening, when you're watching the fireside.
Is it simultaneous?
Yes, they're playing back to back. So
You can't find the fire one, and it's pretty easy to find.
the water one, because the person who made the recording or somebody did the fire one and somebody noticed and was like, take that down. I'm not sure. It's unfortunate. I want all of this stuff to be available to everyone all the time, but there are people who argue that that's not fair to artists, because how are they going to make a living, right? I'm selfish. So a dark room, you're looking at one side or the other. You're not looking at both at once. There's this sort of immolation in both cases. The body disappears, it vanishes. Viola is American, and his career followed Pike's by about a decade. He emerged about 10 years later. He also is one of the artists who did these residencies in a television station. And his work is radically different from Pike's in that he is not interested in televisions. He is not even interested in video as a technology. He's interested in the spectacle, in the illusion, in the visual qualities, right? So Pike wants you to see TV. Viola wants you to see the event that's represented. So, and again, if you think back to Mariko Mori, I know you just had that one photograph to work with, but she, like Viola, uses digital technologies to create this sort of illusionistic world, this spectacle. So Viola, he's using extremely sophisticated technology from a fairly early point in his career. For this video, my understanding is that it was shot at 300 frames per second, which is a lot, as opposed to the standard 24. Incredibly high resolution, very, very high speed. He slows everything down. Not only when you're viewing it are things slowed down, but when he's editing, he's working with microseconds, right? So there is this sort of complete control of the medium. I think, second. I mean, it's generally 24 frames per second. So I included the Nike of Samothrace because I think it's a helpful comparison in terms of thinking about the object's goal, right? This artist wants to turn stone into flesh and fabric and does so very effectively. As Viola turns a sort of screen and light into this spectacular display that seeks to incite sort of emotional states. Much as this is, it's like a Hollywood blockbuster in a museum, right?
Is that the artist himself, or is that somebody?
It looks like him, but I'm not certain that it's him. But he does look like that. He's like balding, glasses, goatee. This is his look. Yes.
Obviously, this is a long time ago, so in terms of like being able to generate the planes, are these actual planes, or is it like a
Oh, no. This is digital
all digital?
manipulation. I'm sure he didn't set anybody on fire.
Yeah. Well, I know that's
Yeah.
a silly question. I didn't know what
Yeah. They had the technology was pretty sophisticated. I mean, in the 60s and 70s, not so much. By the 90s, he is working with digital technologies. And he also, I know in the early aughts, he was working at USC with the game design lab to create a video game. It was awful. I got to do a test run of it. It was so boring. It was insane. And the guys in the lab told me, they were like, yeah, when video game players come in, they really hate it. And I'm like, I'm not a video game player, but I find this very frustrating. And part of it is that he wanted to sort of activate the video game, much as he wants to activate video, in a way that invites contemplation and a real sort of sensory immersion. Now, that works really well in a big, dark room, whereas if you're sitting in front of a monitor pressing buttons, it just gets annoying. I don't think that project really took off. But it was an interesting experiment. So, like Mariko Mori, and this is really interesting, to me anyways, like Mariko Mori and like Namjoon Paik, Bill Viola's work is influenced by like Eastern philosophies and religions. All the video artists are like interested in Buddhism. I don't know if it's just a coincidence, because it's certainly not true of all video art. But it seems in this selection that you have to work with, that's an avenue. I'm curious. I want to sit down with people who made the list, and like talk about their choices. Ooh, awesome! I would like that. I mean, it would be an impossible process, but it's super interesting.
Can I ask you how it actually, so you
Yeah.
go in a room like this, it's dark.
Very dark.
Projection?
There's a screen that hangs
So kind of like
a surface. No, because it's out in the middle of the room.
okay.
So,
And so you go on both sides to see.
yeah.
But where's the sound coming from?
Ooh, I imagine there are speakers. I bet they would be all the way around.
Are they side by side or one's over here and one's over
The speakers or the screens. It's one surface.
there? Only watch one.
Yeah, yeah. So, or the back, depending on which side you want to see. So when you come in the installation that we watched, if you come in through the door, you're going to see the man on fire. Then you walk around to the other side and you see what we saw, which was the man with the water. Does that make sense?
And they both last about 5 minutes.
I think maybe a little more, 6 or 7, but yeah, about that. You can't go over that without people getting impatient. Yeah.
So, have you seen this one live in person?
You know, I was trying to remember if I had when I was looking at it. I know I did see a number of his installations in the late 90s and early aughts. And I don't think I saw this one.
Is it seeable?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure it is. I mean, maybe not right now, but you could track it. I'm sure it's shown.
Museum own it, or 3?
Probably one, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's actually on the list. Usually the collection is listed. It wouldn't be, I feel like maybe the Guggenheim or the Whitney owns it. Does it? Guggenheim owns it?
So that means you might see it at any of the Guggenheims?
They wouldn't have it up all the time. It's the kind of work that would get pulled out for an exhibition. Like, oh, we're doing an exhibition on the influence of Buddhism on American art. So we're going to pull this out.
They can show it in Bilbao, or they can
Yep.
show it in New York.
Yeah.
They can show it.
Show it anywhere. And they can loan it to other institutions also.
So how does Buddhism play into this?
Okay, good question. So, yeah. So it's not a direct translation. Instead, he is very interested in processes of meditation, right? And in being present. He also he speaks about the way that meditation dilates time. It allows us to have a different relationship with time, that it slows it down, that we're constantly just running through time and spending time, and time is money. And through meditation and sort of practices that he associates, and he spent quite a bit of time traveling throughout Asia in his youth, we can learn how to get away from this relationship with time and instead develop this sort of deeply present observational practice. So works like this, which slow down time, right? Everything is happening in sort of a slow motion. And you have these incredibly sort of dramatic events unfolding in a way that is sort of, again, sort of accessibly slowed down. It becomes a sort of meditation on the elements, right? A meditation on water, a meditation on fire, and on this sort of sensory experience. So again, this is a Western appropriation.
Well, it reminds me of the Buddhist immolations in Vietnam in 1963, with those protests that the Buddhist monks
Yes.
did.
Yep.
I don't know if he's overtly referencing that, but
I don't think he is, because the figure disappears rather than actually, we don't see the figure die or act out pain. The figure simply vanishes.
But isn't, just this is from another lecture, but the idea of crossing is that crossing kind of from being to not being, but it's not a violent thing, it's like
Yes.
the Buddhist thing is you're just released from mortality.
Yes, and you become another element, right? You sort of pass into this other
So
state
it's not a
of being.
violent, destroying.
No. Yeah. Okay, one other thing that I think is connected to this and to the Mariko Mori, and less so to Pike, but it's there, is this idea of trying to find access to the universal, a kind of universal or elemental experience. So we talked briefly at the beginning of our last session about Malevich's Black Square, right? So this is this work which to contemporary viewers often carries very little meaning. But the artist's goal, like many modernists, was to find a language that was universal, that could speak to everyone and speak of the most sort of basic and primal universal qualities of being, to be or not to be off or on, right? To be there, to exist, to not exist, on this very basic level. And then we have artists who return to this idea of a universal conversation in the later 20th century, but they're not doing it through abstraction. They're doing it in forms that they feel people will actually recognize and feel and have a kind of emotional relationship with. So this is work that we can see as utopian in a way that sort of harks back to modernist utopian practices, like Malevich's, but it's really communicating it in a much more accessible way, in a more familiar way, in a way that draws on like pop culture, right? Of drama, of high res, and surround sound. Was there a hand? No? Okay. So I wanted to offer a couple of examples. I know one of the questions that you're asked to deal with, which is difficult for this collection, is how have these works influenced works that came after. And there just aren't that many works that came after. But I was thinking about Viola's use of the medium and the way that he pushes it to its absolute limit in terms of something that goes beyond being lifelike, that offers more than the naked eye could see by itself, by slowing things down, by improving the image. And I was thinking, are you guys familiar with Andreas Gursky? He's a German photographer who makes these huge photographs. They're big negatives, so he's using a medium or large format camera. And then he prints these huge, huge prints that he uses digital media to get rid of noise. So in this photograph, he gets rid of the buildings along the sort of back of the bank to create this sort of universal image of a river. So on the one hand, it's highly realistic. Every detail, when you see these actual photographs, digital reproductions like this can't do it justice. Every little tiny detail is so high and saturated and intense. It's more than your eyes could take in the world on their own. But then he's erasing information as well that is distracting. Here's another example. That's a stock exchange, Board of Trade. It is, I was trying to find like a really good version of this image, and I didn't have any luck. But if you ever have a chance, this is one of those artists where it is worth seeing his work in the world, if you can, because it relies so much on scale. Yeah, pretty big. He's not duplicating as far as I know, but he does, he often brings together multiple exposures so that you can have more picture than the camera would allow. So not that it's not that he's layering exposures, it's like he'll move the camera along and then have them be seamlessly sort of presented as sort of a window on this enormous, are you talking about the experiments that he did with photography? Yeah. I mean, Hockney, when he did it, it was very clear, is my understanding, that he was doing it. That use of the medium was transparent, like Pike. He's like, this is what I'm doing with these photographs. With Gursky, you can't tell. You look at it, and it's real. You are looking through a window into a completely believable, seamless, unified world that just contains more than a simple photograph would allow. So like the Hockney would be a good point of contrast or comparison. So again, in terms of thinking about how artists deal with media, I think it's really helpful to just keep in mind the sense of like to what extent does the artist want us to see the medium? To what extent does the artist want us to know what his or her method was? In the case of Viola, he really doesn't want us to think about that. All he wants is for us to see the figure, the water, the fire, to hear the sounds. He wants us to be there with the figure, inhabiting it. Whereas Pike wants us to think about how TV works, right? And how it's a part of our lives, and how we play with this machine, and what assumptions we make about it, and how we let it sort of determine our schedules, et cetera. And I have a historical example that I thought might be useful. So here, Dürer's great piece of turf and Van Gogh's patch of grass. These are both pictures of grass, basically, vegetation. But this one seeks to make the medium transparent. It just wants you to see the plants. Whereas this one, it wants you to see the paint and the movement and the brushstrokes and the surface. And so those kinds of strategic differences continue through contemporary practices in ways that are worth being attentive to.